In Blackburn Diocese, we have a distinctive approach to giving, and we call it Joyful Generous Stewards. It's about helping every member of our diocese to see themselves as a steward of God's bounty, and it's whose privilege it is to give with generosity and with joy. So what makes a joyful, generous steward? We have 10 principles, and I'm just going to outline them very briefly to you. Giving starts with the character of God. If we start by thinking about the gas bill and whether we can afford this or that, we're starting in the wrong place. The Bible starts with God, who is the author and giver of all good gifts, God who loved the world so much that he gave. The second key principle is that giving joyfully is part of our worship. We've always been a bit hesitant as Anglicans, and we sometimes put an offertory hidden in a hymn, or even since COVID, not at all. But when you go to the African church or the church in other parts of the world, giving is very much a joyful part of the service where people come alive with singing and dancing as they celebrate the opportunity to give back to God. Our third principle is that generous giving is part of Christian discipleship. Giving isn't so much a financial issue as a discipleship matter. And as we grow as disciples and we grow more like Jesus, we want to give more. Fourthly, giving is part of our stewardship of God's creation. Sometimes we're a bit, we don't use so much the word stewardship these days when we talk about giving, and that's a loss. But we do use the word when we think about creation and our fragile planet, which God has entrusted to our care. But so that's true of all that we have, all our possessions don't belong to us, they belong to God, and we're called to be stewards. Our fifth principle is that God is not a God of scarcity, but of abundance. God is able to supply all our needs to overflowing. Jesus showed that with his first miracle, creating a prodigious amount of wine. The feeding of 5,000 leaves baskets left over. We need to change the narrative, I think, as we talk about money in our churches, from one of scarcity to one that reflects the God of abundance, and to show people abundant generosity when they come through our doors. The sixth principle is that giving is an act of faith. Sometimes God takes us right to the edge of our resources to see if we will really trust him and put him first. That's true of individuals, it's true also of churches. And sometimes if we're a bit too comfortable in our finances as a church, maybe we need a bigger vision of what God is calling us to do. Our seventh principle is that giving within the diocese is an expression of our interdependence within the body of Christ. The parish share is a wonderful way of expressing that in practice, that the person who gathered much did not have too much, and the person who gathered little did not have too little. But as Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, there is sufficient for the needs of each. And that's what enables us to maintain a Christian presence in every part of our diocese. Our eighth principle is that giving in the New Testament is a response to grace. It's not a matter of rules. There were rules in the Old Testament, and many valued the principle of giving a tithe and then free will offerings on top. In the New Testament, there are no rules, but we're producing some resources for those who have found, like myself and many others, tithing to be a really helpful principle to follow as individuals and as the church. Our ninth principle is that in thinking about giving, we channel the giving of the willing. We don't worry about those who are unwilling or unable. In Exodus 35, the giving of the willing is more than enough to achieve the vision that God has given to his people. Our job is to offer wonderful people amazing opportunities to give if God so moves them. But we do that, we leave the decision to others. And the last principle, the 10th principle, is that it all rests and begins and ends in prayer, because it's in prayer that we come before God, we allow God to shape our thinking and our vision, and if we're doing God's work in God's way, we will not lack God's resources. God bless you.